Hello, friends, and welcome to the Mythological Africans podcast, where we read and talk about stories from African mythology and folklore. I am your host, Helen Tunde. We have come at last to the fifth and final episode in our series examining the archetype of the ruler or the ruling principle as it shows up in African myths, folklore, legends, and history. We started out with definitions to provide context and then used examples from across the continent to examine the patterns of behavior and circumstances, images and symbols that characterize rulership, that is, the impulse, the inclination, or the initiative to take responsibility for securing and maintaining order, sovereignty, and stability for oneself or for a group of people, with the aim to create maximum space for creativity, productivity, abundance, harmony, and unity. We discuss examples of what is perceived as good and bad rulership. We also talked about how the terms good and bad are necessarily relative in this context. We also examined the way patterns of rulership vary between men and women, with some commentary on how the context in which the accounts are captured influence the themes that receive emphasis. And I'm still sitting with how Yenenga, dubbed the founding mother of Burkina Faso's Mosi people, is still remembered more for her war horse and spear raised in victory, the very thing which, according to her legend, she wanted to get away from, than for her aspiration to nurture a family and community. Before we move on from this archetype, I'd like us to return to something we touched on briefly in one of the introductory episodes. Now, if you recall, we defined the four pillar archetypes, that is the self, the persona, the shadow, and the anima-animus complex. And we situated them as the scaffolding of each person's psychic infrastructure. Specifically, we presented the self as the archetype of orientation and meaning. That is to say, it is the aspect of our psychic infrastructure that seeks out and tries to embody the fullness of who we are or who we might become with deliberate and thoughtful action. And as Jung himself put it, the archetype of the self has, functionally, the significance of a ruler of the inner world. We also made the distinction between Jungian and, by extension, European conceptualizations of selfhood from African conceptualizations of selfhood, with the implication that African concepts bring in a sense of connectedness and responsibility toward community, which includes the living and the dead and the wider world, in a way that Jungian concepts don't always do, at least not explicitly. Essentially, just as human society needs an organizing principle that takes the initiative to seek out what makes for order, stability, and contentment and containment, so maximum creativity and productivity, or just plain humanity, might be realized. Each of us as individuals, as societies unto ourselves, have a similar organizing principle and impulse towards realizing our full humanity, our full potential. And I might dare say that the extent to which we each realize ourselves is the extent to which humanity as a whole gets realized, which means, at least the way I see it, the current failures we might witness in global leadership might have individual level implications as well. This is not a new or groundbreaking concept, right? The whole is made up of the sum of its parts. But let's sit with the implications for a moment, because to me, this puts a spotlight on the crisis we currently face as a species. Human rulership structures are, and this is putting it mildly given the state of the world right now, a bit of a mess. Across the world, leaders openly betray the very spirit of what they are supposed to stand for. and institutions that are supposed to keep them in check seem powerless to do anything about it. And again, this is not new, but because of increased communication capacity, we, the people, are able to witness so much more now than before. And we see these dysfunctional patterns of behavior and the circumstances that they create. We see the corrupted images and symbols. We see the chaos they engender and the way this impacts our capacity for creativity and productivity and just to be human, our mere humanity. And what is worth noting is that as long as this psychic chaos continues, right, we will raise rulers or leaders, if we want a softer term for it, who will only know how to operate in this chaos, and the cycle will repeat itself ad infinitum. Now, Jung, who lived through 2 world wars, he knew this intimately. Virtually everything depends on the human psyche and its functions. He wrote this in his 1957 essay, God, the Devil, and the Human Soul. He continues, "It should be worthy of all the attention we can give it, especially today, when everyone admits that the will or woe of the future will be decided neither by the threat of wild animals, nor by natural catastrophes, nor by the danger of worldwide epidemics, but simply and solely by the psychic changes in man. It needs only an almost imperceptible disturbance of equilibrium in a few of our rulers' heads to plunge the world into blood, fire, and radioactivity." But the warning comes with the reassurance that tending to the aspects of our psyches that need tending to can avert or at least reduce the negative impact of this chaos. And that to me is why curating this series is worthwhile. I truly believe that by looking closely at what the stories we have preserved from generation to generation have to say about how we have conceptualized ourselves to be and the evolution of how we have actually been as people, that looking at how these stories were preserved and who did that preservation, and then asking ourselves how we might move into the future, is how we keep ourselves from falling victim to unconscious impulses that, while entirely natural and perhaps even justified, get in the way of us living the beautiful existences that we are capable of on this magnificent planet. This is to say, let us nurture our inner rulers and dignify them with the capacity to recognize and respect other people's inner rulers. The future of our world might just depend on it. We'll stop here for now. Thank you, as always, for listening, and I will see you next week.